Okay. All right, so welcome to the Macroeconomics revision session. This is held by me, JP. All right, so the plan for today is to go through all of macroeconomics. This includes both high level and standard level. We may embark with the initial chapter, which is the level of overall economic activity. So this opens the concept of the circular flow of income model. This is a macroeconomic tool used to explain how activity and national income is measured. So here you can see that firms, they supply an income to households because the households are giving them factors of production. This may be land or labor or other things like that. And then there are also inflows and outflows. So exports are inflows because you inject money into the economy, and investments made by, for example, the government and other government spending. Then some outflows, which are, for example, taxes which flow into the government, and imports which flow out of the country as a whole, and people who are saving their money. There are different ways that you can measure national income. For example, you have gross domestic production, or GDP. This is the value of all final production in a country within a given time period. Now you have to include this given time period here, or you will only get 1 mark on your paper 2s if they ask you to define GDP. If you want to solve this using fancy math, then it's consumer spending plus investment plus government spending plus the balance of exports minus imports. Then we also have gross national product, GNP. This is the value of all final production produced by a country's citizen, both domestically and abroad. So all final goods made or services. So to do some fancy math here, then you can solve GDP. That's GDP plus the net income from abroad. And then we also have the concept of green GDP, which is a measure of national income with respect to environmental impacts. So this is the GDP minus the environmental costs. There are different types of GDP. You have the real GDP, which is GDP that is adjusted for inflation. To calculate this on your paper 3, you take GDP times the price deflator. To find this deflator, you can take 100 divided by 100 plus the inflation rate of the country. No, this is not a percent, this is a rate, this is a decimal. And then we have nominal GDP, which is not adjusted for inflation. And then we have GDP per capita, which is GDP divided by population size. You may be asked to discuss the limits of GDP, and those are, for example, that they do not measure the impacts of a black market, because the national or the government doesn't know exactly what's going on in black markets, hence the name black market. They're under the radar, as you could say. And also inaccuracies in data collection. Much like your group 4 IAs, they may have large errors. This brings the concept of the business cycle. This shows the overall trend of an economy over time. So on the y-axis you have real GDP, and on the x-axis you have time. The business cycle is the periodic fluctuations in economic activity measured by changes in real GDP. Yeah. As you can see here, so there are different parts of the cycle. You have a recovery when you have just been at the trough, where the economy was at its lowest, and then you have a boom when it's at the top, and this falls down to a recession when the economic activity is low. But the overall trend line is a linear increase. The next topic is 2.2, which is aggregate demand and supply. Aggregate demand is the value of all goods and services demanded in an economy in a given time period. This is shown by the components of AD, which is the same as GDP, which is consumer spending plus government spending plus investment by firms minus plus the net balance of the economy, of the export minus import, sorry. This is shown by a downward sloping curve. Aggregate demand is shown here, or you can use AD on the exams, and then on the y-axis you have average price level, and on the y-axis you have national income or real output. You may also write real GDP. Shifts in AD will occur if any of the components of AD changes. So, for example, consumer spending, government spending, or investment by firms, etc. So, for example, if there's a change in income, then consumers would have a larger spendable income, which may increase their consumption in the economy. So they buy more goods because they have more money. Interest rates might also affect this. This would affect both consumer spending and investments, and to an extent the exports minus imports. Since if for example the interest rates are higher, that will lead to more people wanting to save, and the companies would be less likely to take up a loan since they cost more. And also consumer confidence. For example, if you are a CEO of a firm and you are not really sure what's going to happen, you might hold off spending money in the economy until you know that the future is certain. Aggregate supply refers to the amount of real output that firms are willing and able to supply at each price level. The determinants here are anything that changes the production costs. So, for example, wages, raw material, and to an extent imports, and the corporate tax. So there are different viewpoints for aggregate supply. You have the monetarist view or the neoclassical view. They distinguish between the short run and the long run. As you can see here, they have a short run aggregate supply, or SRAS, and a long run aggregate supply, long run AS. And the theory here is that the long run aggregate supply depends solely on the quality and quantity of the factors of production. Hence, it's perfectly inelastic since you are using everything you can here. So you can't use more than you have, therefore you can't be out here for a long period of time. They mean that the government should not need to intervene or to do that as little as they can. This brings up the concept of the self-correcting economy. For example, here you have an inflationary gap as you are at a level of output larger than the full output. This might be, for example, if the interest rates decrease and then firm starts investing a lot, and then this causes inflation in the economy. So suddenly things become more expensive, which would again affect the supply side and may shift the supply side inwards, which would again move you back into the long run. Same goes for deflationary gaps. They will also correct themselves. What does the word real mean in the definition of aggregate supply? There is no real. Is there a real life example of monetarist equilibrium? Well, they think that most economies, like they are showing the same thing. So for example, in the monetarist view, in the long run, then you will always go back here and you can shift in and out. In a deflationary gap, for example, if the what would happen? Say that the government doesn't spend as much money anymore, then there will be a deflation so that things become cheaper, so then the short run AS might shift outwards. This brings the concept, and then there's another theory, which is the Keynesian perspective. Keynesian meant that there is no long run, and that there will be at some areas of like when you're not using all of your FOPs, then you cannot have inflation at all. So as you can see on this curve, at number 1, then there's a low level of activity, so that the output may change, but there will be no inflation since you have spare capacity. And then for number 2, then you are losing out on that spare capacity, so it's getting used up. So then the price level will start to slowly increase. And then you have at number 3, which is full employment, which is where that all capacity is used up and there's no increase in output. The thing about sticky down wages is that here, for example, people may start accepting lower wages as the unemployment is higher. So that may also decrease the cost of production. While here, Keynesian thought that people will not want to have a lower wage, or so therefore they are sticky downwards, that they are not as likely to change downwards. So to correct the economy in the Keynesian perspective, the government needs to take action by using some of their policies to influence AD, which may shift in or out, which we will touch upon towards the end here on how they shift AD. Then there's also the Keynesian multiplier. It shows that an increase in injections will lead to a greater increase in the national incomes, which says that the money you get in gets multiplied. This is sort of a ripple effect. So say that they add $1 to the economy, and then since someone got $1 more, they feel richer and may spend more, and then that becomes someone's income, and then their income increases and they may spend more, and so on and so forth. So there is sort of a ripple effect. To calculate this on your paper 3s, they will give you this data, and then you have to plug them in. So it's marginal propensity to consume, marginal propensity to save, marginal propensity to tax, and marginal propensity to I'm not quite sure what that means, but you will see it on the exam. This brings us to 2.3 macroeconomic objectives. They include low unemployment and low and stable rate of inflation, and economic growth and equity in the distribution of income. So unemployment occurs when people who are willing and able and actively seeking employment are unable to find it. To do the fancy math here, you do the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force times 100 to find the percentage. There are different types of unemployments. There are real wage unemployments. This is usually the cause by the minimum wage. Say that they set a floor here that the wage cannot go below WE. So that, for example, if this was the original equilibrium, then they will be up here. So all these people down here are without a job, and hence they are unemployed. Then there's also demand efficient unemployment. For example, if aggregate demand drops, then firms need to decrease their costs to stay afloat, and hence they might lay people off. This is shown here, and then the demand for labor shifts in, which causes unemployment again. Frictional unemployment, they are people who are for example, just out of college, and then there is a job for them, they just haven't found it yet. So this is not as bad. But the worst one is structural unemployment, which happens when the economy evolves faster than the human inputs. So for example, when self-driving trucks arrive, suddenly a lot of people who used to drive trucks will no longer have a job, and therefore they are forced to switch job or engage in training, which will cause them to be unemployed. And if they don't do any of that, then they will be unemployed for a long period of time. Another goal is a low and stable rate of inflation. For example, inflation, or the definition of inflation, is that it's a sustained increase in the average price level over time. Disinflation is a fall in the inflation rate, so it's not deflation, because deflation is a sustained fall in the average price levels over time. This is usually shown on the diagram by shifting in the average price level, or an increase or a decrease in those values. There are different types of inflation. There's the cost pull inflation, which is when the aggregate supply is pulling the price levels up by shifting inwards. This is usually caused by supply side shocks, for example, the oil price increasing. And then we have, okay, it doesn't show up, but we have demand pull inflation, and this is when demand shifts out, which will then intersect short-run aggregate supply at a higher point, and hence increasing the price level. That could be due to a change in any of the components of AD. How do we measure inflation? We use something called a consumer price index, which a government agency picks a basket of goods that is supposed to signify the spending by people in the economy, for example, spending on food and clothes, and then they weigh them to represent the importance. For example, food may be more important than cosmetics. To calculate this, you need to find an index. If the index is weighted, you have to multiply each value by the weight, and then add all your final values together. If it's not weighted, then you just add all of these, and then divide by 100, I think. To find a change in the index, then you take new index minus old index, divide by old index times 100. Then this is the inflation rate. The consequences of inflation: lower international competition. Your exports become more expensive, while your imports become cheaper. So this might even further offset AD, which this may cause AD to decrease even more. And also, some consumers may be really strained, since the value of the money that they have has gone down, and if they don't have as much money, then they might fall into poverty. And this may also cause lower confidence in the economy, as investors are unsure about the future and will therefore hold off doing their investments, or even pull investments back. The Phillips curve represents that as demand of labor increase, firms pay higher wages to compete. This shifts the short-run aggregate supply curve inwards, causing inflation. So say that, so here, for example, when short-run aggregate supply decreases because firms pay higher wages, so their costs of production increase, then this will cause a lower inflation rate, since as you see here, it will intersect it. No, it will cause a higher inflation rate, and hence it would decrease inflation. The opposite is true for a decrease in demand for labor. Economic growth refers to a sustained increase in a country's real GDP over time. This is calculated as any other percent change calculation. This is signified by a shift in the long-run aggregate supply or in the outward shift in the PPC curves. Another goal is to promote equity in the distribution of income. There's a distinction that has been made here, is that equity means fairness, so that fair inequalities may exist. For example, people who work more may earn more, while equality means that everyone gets the same, so that there are no fair inequalities. So then the econ course talks about equity. This is shown by the Lorenz curve. You can calculate a Gini coefficient, which is the area A divided by the area A plus B. So if the Gini coefficient goes up, that means that this area has shifted down, causing higher inequality or inequity. And you also have to label these curves correctly to get full marks. Consequence of low equity, the major one is an increase in poverty. So there are two different types of poverty. There's absolute poverty, which is that they now earn an income below the threshold for supplying basic needs like food, shelter, and clothes. And then there is relative poverty, which is income below the social norm of the country. Some of the consequences of poverty, they include low living standards and quality of life. This may also lead to an increase in crime, and a lack of access to healthcare and education, which may cause a poverty trap as the kids. For example, if you are poor and then you have a kid, and then the kid grows up poor, and which has a hard time getting out of poverty, and then the cycle never ends, and you will always stay in poverty. And some may think that the only way out is to result in doing illegal stuff, because that might increase your income. There are many reasons why poverty may cause crime, but one of them is that some may be desperate to gain more money, so they might start doing illegal things, like selling drugs. Okay, so then there's another thing to talk about. They are government policies. They include monetary policy, fiscal policy, and market-based supply-side policies. So a fiscal policy is the manipulation of government spending, and it may also be a change in the tax rates or subsidies. So this will change the G here component of AD, which will change AD accordingly. When you're asked to evaluate a policy, you can say that it's very expensive for the government to do this. It may also result in a crowding out effect. Since the government may take up loans to fund these policies, this may cause an increase in the interest rates. So if, for example, the goal was to increase AD, then the upping of the interest rates might cause AD to fall down a bit, which will dampen the effect of the intended policy or goal. They are slow. Governments are known for being slow. But a good thing is that it may cause economic growth, because they might invest or do permanent investments in, for example, roads and infrastructure. Then there are monetary policies. this is manipulation of the money supply / interest rates. This will change the consumer spending and the business spending. When interest rates goes up, then consumers may be more likely to save their money and spend less because their loans become more expensive. And for example, if interest rates were to go down, that will make loans less expensive, so firms might want to start taking up loans and investing, which would increase AD. When you want to evaluate this policy, you can say that it's usually really fast. They may happen overnight, but they may harm low-income earners. For example, those who have taken up loans that may be beyond their capabilities, and suddenly that loan becomes more expensive. They might also fall into relative poverty, which is not good. Then you have the market-based supply-side policy. This is when the government impose policies aimed at manipulation of the supply side of the economy. They are usually market-based, which means that they try to change how the market works. For example, they can change taxation, which would make the profits for firms larger, which may cause them to invest more, and also their cost of production will be lower since they don't have to pay as much tax. They may also do increased spending on education or infrastructure, which may cause long-term economic growth. Or they can decrease the power of labor unions, which may lower unemployment. When you evaluate this, you can say that it may improve long-term economic growth, but they may be slow since it's the government doing things. Here it's the central bank doing stuff, and the central bank is an independent sector. Therefore, they don't have to go through all those parliament hearings and stuff. Well, here they usually have to. And you can also evaluate the environmental impacts of this. If they, for example, begin to change taxes, then firms might begin to produce more, which may harm the environment. Right, that was it for macroeconomics. Tomorrow we'll go through international economics, and on Thursday we'll go through the high-level stuff of micro. Thank you.